The veteran captain, worn and battle-scarred, stood at the center of his ship, his gaze moving across the faces of his young crew. "Listen closely," he began, his voice grave and unwavering. "I don't care what stories you've heard or what you think you know about humans. Forget the tales that call them primitive or predictable. Those who underestimate humanity never return to tell their stories." He paused, letting his words hang heavily in the air. "It was a long time ago," he continued, voice laced with a quiet reverence. "But I remember every detail of my encounter with them. We were patrolling near the edge of their territory, nothing more than a routine exercise. Orders were to map the periphery, assess any weaknesses. Humans were inconsequential in the eyes of our leaders. Our fleet was larger, our technology, supposedly, light years ahead. So we advanced." The captain looked around, catching the wary, skeptical eyes of the crew. "We didn't see them at first. They weren't even on our scanners. Just empty space, cold and silent. But humans? They're crafty. They don't show themselves until it's already too late." His hand clenched as if reliving the moment. "Then, out of nowhere, they struck. Ships appeared in the dead of space, surrounding us faster than we could react. We were locked in, every escape route calculated, blocked off. The human ships, they looked crude, patched together, barely able to hold their own in battle, or so we thought. But the first barrage told us otherwise. They had weaponized materials that hit harder than anything we'd ever seen. They didn't just damage, they obliterated. No mercy. No time for recovery." A faint trace of something like admiration edged into his voice. "But it wasn't the technology alone. It was how they fought. Every shot, every maneuver, designed for maximum damage with minimal effort. They'd studied us. They knew our weak points better than we knew theirs. And they didn't fight to intimidate, they fought to end it, quickly and decisively. We weren't soldiers to them. We were targets." The crew remained silent, captivated, uneasy. "Our fleet scattered in disarray," he continued, voice low. "Their smallest ships outmaneuvered our best. It was as if they moved with one mind, a hive of coordination and deadly purpose. And those ships? I've faced battles across galaxies, yet nothing ever held up to the armor on those human crafts. They'd taken materials we didn't even know could be reinforced and turned them into shields, hulls, weapons. Where we had gaps, they had unbreakable lines." A younger crew member finally spoke up, voice full of the same doubt the captain himself had once held. "But sir, if their technology is so powerful, why haven't they expanded more aggressively?" The captain gave a bitter laugh. "You don't understand, do you? Expansion doesn't interest them the way it does others. They are patient. For humans, protecting what's theirs is worth more than taking what isn't. Their empire may seem small to us, confined to a handful of systems. But cross into their territory uninvited? You'll learn quickly why no one dares to occupy human space." He leaned forward, his eyes hardening as he remembered the bodies, the floating wreckage, the silence of space broken by crackling distress calls. "Humanity doesn't need to conquer. They've perfected defense to such an extent that any force foolish enough to test them doesn't survive the lesson. Even when they don't pursue, the damage they inflict stays. It lingers in the memories of those lucky enough to escape. You don't just lose ships or soldiers, you lose the will to ever return." He let his words settle, watching the realization dawn across the faces around him. "So take this as your first and only warning. If you ever find yourself near human territory, turn back. No prizes await you there. Only ruin. Their technology may seem primitive. Their numbers may seem small. But I am here because I understood too late that they are not to be trifled with." The room was silent. The young crew members looked away, some nervously fidgeting, others staring at the captain, wide-eyed. He gave them a grim smile, though there was no humor in it. "You think this is a choice? That I'm offering advice?" He shook his head. "Consider this an order. Don't challenge them. Don't provoke them. You want to live to tell your own war stories? Then remember mine. Years ago, they sent us in with a fleet. The veteran captain began, his eyes distant as if seeing through space and time. We were part of an armada, hundreds of ships strong, tasked with pressing into human territory to test their strength. To our leaders, it was a formality. We had no reason to think it would end in anything but a swift, decisive victory. He took a steadying breath, letting the memory unfold. Our fleet crossed into their outer perimeter, sensors on full alert, weapons armed. Silence greeted us, as if space itself held its breath. We expected resistance, yet we were met with nothing but the cold, empty void. A murmur rippled through the crew as the captain paused. They didn't come from the front, or from behind, or even from above. No. They materialized from all directions, slipping in undetected until it was too late. Our sensors didn't catch a thing. They were there, perfectly positioned, before we even knew they'd arrived. And just like that, we were surrounded. A flicker of disbelief crossed a few of his listeners' faces, but the captain's gaze was unyielding. Humans think differently. They don't just plan battles, they study them, anticipate every possible move. Their ships looked like they'd been hastily patched together, as if pulled from a scrap heap, but don't be fooled. They hit with the strength of a nova and the precision of a needle. The captain's voice lowered as he recounted the human tactics, each word laced with respect and the faintest touch of fear. Every move they made was efficient, unrelenting. They coordinated strikes in ways that looked chaotic to us, yet somehow worked with a terrifying harmony. They didn't fight for dominance. They fought to end us quickly, with no room for escape. He remembered the sound, thousands of ships imploding under the relentless barrage. His own hull shook under the impact of human fire, shields buckling, systems failing. One by one, our ships faltered, splitting open like ripe fruit, their contents spilling into space. We outnumbered them, yes, but every shot they took counted, like they knew our ships inside and out. In moments our lines broke. We were trying to retreat before we even realized the fight had begun. The young crew stared at him, some with wide eyes, others fidgeting uneasily. Think about that, the captain pressed. We were trained for combat, for war. We had the advantage of numbers, supposedly of technology. Yet they crushed us like an afterthought. One of the younger crew members raised a hand hesitantly, voice faltering. But why didn't they follow us? Why didn't they finish the job? A shadow crossed the captain's face. That's what makes humans so dangerous. They don't need to chase. It isn't about conquest for them. They fought because we stepped too close. To them, it wasn't about erasing us. It was about ensuring we'd never return. They let the survivors go because that was enough. They knew those who lived would carry the story. His tone darkened, recalling the retreat, his own crippled ship limping through space, surrounded by the broken fragments of what was once a proud armada. We thought they'd press on, finish what they'd started. But they didn't even bother. They watched, letting us crawl away. To them, victory wasn't in annihilation, it was in the message they sent. They knew the whispers would spread. The captain's gaze settled on each of them, cold and unyielding. Every survivor from that battle became a warning. A reminder. When I say humans don't fight like us, I mean they have nothing to prove. They don't wage war for power or territory, not the way we do. They simply protect what's theirs, and if you threaten it, they respond with a fury so calculated, so complete, it leaves nothing but regret in its wake. The room was silent, only the faint hum of the ship breaking the tension that seemed to stretch with every word. They're survivors, yes, but more than that, they're perfectionists. Everything they do has purpose. They've engineered themselves into something entirely different, something ruthless in its simplicity. To them, defending their own is instinct, bred into their very bones. A murmur of disbelief ran through the crew, but the captain's face was stony. You think I'm exaggerating? Ask anyone who has faced humans in battle, if you can find them. They'll tell you that nothing, absolutely nothing, prepares you for the reality of what they bring to the fight. It's not about strength or numbers. It's about a mindset that every single one of them seems to share, a refusal to be conquered, no matter the odds. That's what makes them terrifying. The young crew exchanged glances, uncertainty and fear mixing on their faces. "That's why I tell you this now," the captain said quietly. "So that when you encounter them, you understand what you're up against. So that you know, beyond any doubt, that crossing them is a mistake that can't be undone." He looked around the room, ensuring his words had settled into their minds. "Humans don't need to chase us. The fear they instill does that for them. They simply stand their ground, and those who come too close don't come back." The silence returned, heavy and absolute. The young crew members avoided his gaze, shifting uncomfortably, haunted by his words. The veteran's gaze softened just a fraction, as he allowed himself a grim smile. "Remember this lesson. Let it be the only one you need." The veteran captain addressed the gathering of the alien coalition's leaders, his voice firm. "I've been at the helm longer than most of you have commanded a fleet. And in all that time, I've never seen a species rally like humans do. Many of you dismiss them as fragmented, weak, even primitive. You couldn't be more wrong. If there's one thing they understand better than any species I've encountered, it's unity." A few scoffs echoed, dismissive. The captain continued undeterred. "Their diversity is their strength. Each region of their planet has its own culture, language, history. To outsiders, it looks chaotic, impossible to understand. But when they feel threatened, all of that vanishes. They're like a machine, every part fits into place when it matters most. They'll set aside any quarrel, put down every difference, to stand as one force against the common enemy." A skeptical voice spoke up. "How can such a divided people unite so completely?" The captain's gaze sharpened. "Because, unlike us, they don't assume their differences make them weak. They assume they're an advantage. A human will fight for their home, their family, their ideals, yes. But threaten any one of them, and you threaten all. They see an attack on one as an attack on all, and that's when they come together with a power that's unmatched." He looked around, sensing the leader's discomfort. "You're all so accustomed to hierarchy, loyalty to rank, to rigid command. You can't fathom a people who, under threat, could mobilize without waiting for orders, without hesitation. That's humanity's nature. They've endured wars among themselves, developed weapons that push the limits of their own world. They've survived crises that would fracture most civilizations. And every time, they've come out stronger, more united." Some began to listen more intently, sensing his conviction. "In battle, they're impossible to predict. A human crew may come from completely different walks of life, yet in combat, they act with a single purpose. They don't need the same orders, don't wait for permission. They respond to threat on an instinctive level, as though they share an unspoken understanding. They operate as a cohesive unit, adapting to change faster than any protocol could dictate." One of the leaders shook his head. "How does their technology measure up? Surely they're limited by their resources, by lack of access to our advancements." The captain almost smiled. "Technology? You misunderstand. Humans don't rely on superior tech to win. They rely on their ability to take what they have and make it more than enough. Give them a weapon, and they'll modify it, improve it, weaponize it beyond its original design. They've found ways to turn even their weaknesses into advantages. They'll hack, rewire, retrofit anything they can get their hands on. Their curiosity knows no bounds." He leaned forward, his voice a shade darker. "When our fleet encountered them, they weren't just fighting us. They were observing, learning, reverse engineering. In one battle, they adapted faster than we'd prepared in years. Imagine a species that doesn't just rely on its technology but evolves with it, every ship, every tool molded by those who use it, tweaked to meet the challenge at hand." Another leader interrupted, skeptical. "So they're inventive. But surely that doesn't make them invincible." The captain fixed his gaze on the leader. "No, it doesn't. But it makes them impossible to anticipate. And that's a far more dangerous quality. They don't wait for permission to innovate. In their eyes, every situation is a puzzle to solve, every failure a lesson. You'll see a ship designed to transport goods, and they'll see a potential weapon. They'll use every scrap, every material, nothing wasted. It's their nature." The leaders were silent, absorbing this. The captain continued unyielding. When you face humans, you're not facing one unified culture or strategy. You're facing every culture, every strategy they've ever devised. And they won't use them as isolated tactics. No, they blend them, adapt them, respond to your strengths by countering with their own, perfectly. I've seen them coordinate in silence, as if they shared one mind. I've seen them anticipate each other's movements without a single order given. They don't just react, they're already steps ahead. A quiet, reluctant respect settled over the room. The captain nodded, sensing the shift. It's easy to look at their size, their scattered holdings, and assume they're small, unremarkable. That they're contained. But that's a trap. Humans are contained because they choose to be, not because they're limited. Their unity isn't a constant, it's a choice. A power they bring forth when necessary. And when it's called upon, nothing can stand against it. He looked each leader in the eye. I know what you're thinking, that they're just another species, that our forces would overwhelm them in a direct assault. But that's your first mistake. Humans never play by expected rules. Their power lies in their unpredictability, in the strength of their will to protect what's theirs. They won't chase after you. They'll let you come to them. And when you do, you'll realize that they are a fortress, one that you can't breach without paying a price. The captain folded his hands, his tone final. Remember this, their unity is as fierce as their technology is resourceful. Underestimate them, and you'll face not only their weapons but the will of every human standing behind them. And if you're lucky enough to survive, you'll leave with a memory you'll never forget. The silence that followed was profound, the weight of his words heavy in the air. The captain let his final words of caution linger, but a young fleet commander scoffed from the back. Enough with the ghost stories. I've seen the reports. They're just another species with good PR and a reputation inflated by luck. If you've survived them, so will I. Maybe I'll even be the one to end this legend you speak of. The veteran's gaze hardened, but he said nothing, watching as the eager commander set off with his fleet, all bravado and pride. Days passed in tense silence, and then, suddenly, a report flashed on the veteran's comms, a distress signal from the young commander's fleet. They had entered human space. The captain's warning had gone ignored. He listened as the panicked voices came through. They're everywhere. These readings, no ship could move like this. The commander's voice, once brimming with confidence, was now thick with fear. Engines failing. Hull integrity dropping. We're surrounded. The veteran closed his eyes, knowing too well what the young commander was experiencing. The humans had them in their sights, each move calculated to contain and neutralize. They didn't strike outright, didn't even communicate, only held their ground, moving with lethal precision that left no room for escape. Moments later, he heard the unmistakable sounds of battle, the relentless, silent symphony that humans performed so well. The young commander's fleet was crumbling. Where are they coming from? Our scanners are useless. The panicked words echoed, fading into static. The veteran's gaze remained steady. He had known this would be the outcome. The human response wasn't an act of anger or retaliation. It was methodical, designed to show that entering their territory was a fatal mistake. The humans didn't need to wipe out the fleet entirely to make their point. They dismantled it piece by piece, showing them how futile resistance was. A few hours later, what was left of the young commander's once proud fleet limped back, damaged and silent, survivors only because the humans had allowed them to retreat. Those who returned were no longer cocky, no longer dismissive. They wore expressions hollowed by fear, shaken by a force they hadn't understood until it was too late. They didn't need words to describe what they had experienced. Their eyes spoke volumes. The veteran met the broken commander, who could barely look him in the eye. You thought I exaggerated, he said quietly. You thought humans were just another enemy to conquer. The young commander's voice cracked as he replied. I thought they'd be easy. I thought they'd fight like we do. But they don't. It was like they could read our every move, like we were trapped in a game we didn't even understand. The veteran nodded. That's because they don't fight for conquest or glory. They fight only to protect what's theirs, with a dedication that's become their ultimate weapon. You encountered their strength, yes, but you also encountered their restraint. Believe me, if they wanted to, they could have ensured none of you returned. The room fell silent as the full weight of his words settled. Every surviving member of the young commander's fleet now bore the same haunted expression the veteran had carried since his own encounter. The realization of what it meant to be tolerated rather than destroyed was humbling, even terrifying. The veteran continued, his voice unyielding. Do you understand now? They could have pursued you, wiped out every last ship. They chose not to because they didn't need to. A single confrontation was enough to ensure their borders remained respected. He paused, watching the young commander's trembling hands, understanding that the lesson had finally hit home. That's what makes them unique, makes them so different from us. Humanity doesn't need to rule the stars, they only need to protect what they consider theirs. And they do it with a precision we'll never match. The younger officers in the room sat straighter, their faces betraying a new respect, no longer dismissive, no longer doubtful. The veteran knew he had finally reached them, that his words now had weight because of the broken survivors before them. If you take anything from this, let it be this truth: respect humanity's territory, respect their silence. Do not cross them. They're not conquerors, but defenders, and there's nothing in this universe more formidable than that. The young commander finally met his gaze, humbled and changed. I understand now, he whispered, voice thick with regret. I thought they were just stories. I thought I'd be the one to show you wrong. The veteran placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of understanding but also finality. We all make that mistake once. But it's the last mistake we need to make. Because humans won't fight for the sake of proving anything. Their silence is their warning. Cross it, and you'll come face to face with something that can't be conquered, something that doesn't need victory because survival is all they know. He looked at the young commander one last time, certain his message had been delivered. Let the galaxy remember this: humanity is not a force to be trifled with, not because they want power or control, but because they don't need it. They protect, they endure, and if provoked, they will show a strength that leaves those who survive haunted for the rest of their lives. The room fell into a solemn silence, every face marked by the gravity of what they'd just heard. The young commander and his crew were living proof that humanity's territory was sacred ground, and from that day forward, none among them would dare to cross it.